back to the main subject matter. Why am I talking about the anthropology of Star Trek? I see some of you already know, because you've been to the talks, all right? But there's nothing more anthropological to talk about in sci-fi, I don't think, than Star Trek. Star Trek is the most anthropological piece of science fiction I've ever come across. Anyone disagree? Anyone know what anthropology is? We'll go back, we'll start with that. How many people have no idea what anthropology is? Couple people, couple honest people. Anthropology, and then you'll get it. Anthropology studies the entire spectrum of all that it is to be human, in the past, the present, even the future. It looks at cultures as a whole. It looks at what makes cultures similar, what makes them different. It looks at every aspect of a culture, its language, its style of dress, its technology, you name it. And it looks at it. It even looks at the role of the individual in shaping that culture. So it's huge. Anthropology is really anything you want it to be, as long as you're focused on the human. Therefore, back to my original point, Star Trek is probably the most anthropological of shows out there. And as a kid, I used to wonder, I didn't know about anthropology, but I knew what sociology was, and I'd be like, wow, this Gene Roddenberry dude, he's like a really cool sociology dude or something, you know? He's got this insight. And so it was that first attracted me. And again, like anthropology, Star Trek shares a prime directive. The American Anthropological Association has a very specific ethical guideline. In the course of doing your research, you never interfere with the culture of another. Kirk threw that out the window too. Kirk would be a very bad, not only Starfleet officer, but very bad anthropologist too, I suppose. And I think, unlike Starfleet, anthropology is a little more harsh in their punishment about that violation. Anyhow, Star Trek indeed does study the human condition right across space and time the same way that anthropology does. And it also focuses on the role of the individual. We could look at Kirk in several ways as a main individual who does propel cultural evolution. We could even use the example from the new movie and apply the Chris Pine Kirk as an example of the role of the individual and the impact that individual has, especially the Chris Pine one. I'm going to stop on that for a second. When looking at the individuality, we're looking at individual variability in thought and behavior. What one character throughout all of Star Trek stands out when we're talking about the level of variability that makes you stand out from everybody else? Kirk, 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 right? Feel free to argue with me. Is there another one you like? Okay. Anyhow, the Chris Pine Kirk, if Kirk hadn't been such a misfit type of character with his own drive and his own vision of things, what would happen? What would happen to Starfleet as we know it? What would happen to the universe as we know it in these centuries? Be very different. So, sometimes when he does interfere, whether it's interfering with Starfleet, button heads with Starfleet, or interfering with another culture, sometimes some very positive things come about that preserve culture, that preserve biological organisms, that propel evolutionary change in a very positive way for other planets and also for Starfleet. And that's what's so important to take out of that, because each one of us is paying attention to the messages in Star Trek, and each one of us has individual variability in our thoughts and behaviors. We share common worldviews, we share a common culture, but we have that individuality that makes us us, and we have, therefore, that power to make that kind of a change in our society. And time again, I've met so many people who use Star Trek in their daily lives and talk about how important it's been to them, and how it's helped them not only change their own lives, but how they've used it in a positive way to change the lives of others. And as I've been teaching, and teaching with science fiction and fantasy, so many more educators have come to me and have either shared their story of how they've used Star Trek in the classroom, or have come and asked me to help teach faculty how to incorporate Star Trek or other science fiction fantasy material across disciplines. Because one of the most important things that we can do is teach students how to think. I will now pause on that thought for a moment. And Star Trek is one of those shows that's timeless, and it promotes the one thing that we badly need to restore, which is critical thinking, and promoting individual thought, and allowing that individual to develop in their own way and make those important contributions to the future. So, in that sense, Star Trek is enormously powerful, and I'm glad that it's had the impact that it's had. A couple other things that I do with the course is I talk about Star Trek as a cultural mirror, and I don't think anybody in here can't think of a dozen and one examples of how Star Trek is a cultural mirror. Star Trek takes our world, it may be the past, our past historical circumstances, politically, religiously, in terms of gender issues and so on and so forth. It may be our common mythologies, our common mythological past, and takes that and says, look at yourselves. What are you doing? What are you thinking? Why are you repeating all these cycles? What's up with you? And here are your issues. And by the way, instead of trying to blow each other up, here's maybe a better idea as to how to make this work for you so that you might continue to have humans in the 23rd and 24th century. Star Trek, in that sense, then, by mirroring us, is teaching us. It acts as a cultural teacher. Okay. All fine and good, everybody's on board with that, and everybody can think of 101 examples. We could talk about Cisco, and how this guy is tied to the prophets of Bajor, yet exists in a secular federation. We could talk about Spock, and cultural or ethnic identity. And I particularly like, and as we know from WonderCon of right before the Abrams movie came out, I was not on board with this film at all. I was an adamant Trek purist, how dare they? Some of us who saw that show. I will be honest, I went to the film, and I did not care for what I saw as a fan. Initially, my initial response was not very positive. I went back 18 times. And I went with a notebook in hand. That film, regardless of the Trekkie fan quirks, that film is very much a Roddenberry Star Trek film. And the one thing that I really like about it was Spock. It's something that many of us do. People try to pigeonhole us, historically, racial classification, and using this idea of racially classifying humans to tell us who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to think and act and where we fit into the real world. Well, each one of us goes on our personal journey to figure those things out. Spock speaks to that issue. The concept of race has been debunked many, many, many times biologically. It's also been debunked by Star Trek. Does anyone know how? How has Star Trek debunked the concept of a biological race? Biologically classifying individuals, humans or humanoids, racially?
With the tricorder?
Tricorder would tell us something about DNA structure, sure.
We all had the same origin. In that one episode where the people showed them the origin of all the races.
Yes! That's the episode, The Chase from Next Generation. And when we start to really think about this, what defines a species?
The ability to have children with each other.
The ability to have children with each other and go on and have those children be fertile, to reproduce again. Belana Torres. Well, all humanoids across the universe must be the same species. Well, isn't that funny? Because I think all the humans on this planet are the same species too. I can go anywhere on the planet and breed with any human I want. Let's go try that out. That's the current thing to do, you know. Don't just take my word for it that we're all the same species. Let's ponder what would Kirk do? Kirk would go out and experiment.
Yes, he would.
He probably has, the data just hasn't been published. It's classified by Star. This data. I want to talk about data. I want to talk about Q. Two other very significant characters that have been developed. Q. Why is Q of anthropological interest?
Looks like a god.
Well, okay, what does that mean?
But they came from the same basic species.
He also researches the
They
humans
moved
all
on
the time.
past where we are.
Okay.
He researches the humans all the time, and that makes you look at what they're doing.
Yeah, Q's a really interesting anthropologist. I wish I had his power as an anthropologist. I'd have a ball for myself. Turning Crusher into an Irish setter and the whole 9 yards. Yeah, bring the Borg on. Yeah, let's go zipping around there. See what the Borg mix it up with for you. Yeah.
Remember from the Voyager show, that from their viewpoint, everything's boring, nothing's new to them. They just
Do you know why? Did you see what the continuum looks like? The continuum looks like the Midwest.
Desert.
I looked at it and I said, oh my gosh, the continuum is northern Illinois. I went to school there. I understand why they're bored. And it all made perfect sense to me after that. But yeah, you gotta go play with somebody because you're bored. You know, we could look at Trelane. A lot of people have said Trelane is a Q-type character, probably an early version of it. And I would say that's probably true as well, huh?
He was a kid.
Q squared.
Well, right, but he had a lot of similar qualities and did similar things to, you know, in comparison to Q, the Q that we know as Q. And I find it very interesting. This character was enormously popular. Does anyone know anything about the archetype character, the trickster? The trickster, mythological character. What do you know?
Loki, isn't it?
Okay, but what does he do? What's this type of character do?
Creates mischief and makes uses people.
Origin of chaos.
Against itself.
Yeah. And by doing this, you're evoking responses by the individual that you're playing with to teach them something about themselves. And there was nothing better than when Q was in charge of the afterlife in Tapestry. And Picard dies. And Picard's like, oh, hell no, you're not in charge of the afterlife. Or where is the Eternal Complaint Department? Oh no, I am in charge of the afterlife. Welcome. Now I will play with you for all of eternity. The biggest lesson that he teaches Picard is what? He messed with him pretty good. He says, okay, dumbass, you want a second chance because you think you're an idiot? You want a real heart instead of the fake one you got. Okie dokie, I give it to you. Classic trickster archetype.
And our choices make us who we are.
Your choices make you who you are, and you need to keep those experiences with you, because when Picard got his real heart and, you know, became this stuffy old guy that his friends will never speak to again because something's wrong with him, he's like, I'm pushing papers on the Enterprise. You can't be telling me this is real. Oh, it's very real. This is what you asked for. Well, hell no, it's not what I asked for. I'm supposed to be captain. Oh, no, 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 no. You negated that. See, you wanted this. I gave it to you. What's your problem? You've got to be able to take the risks and do some things in the spur of the moment, because who you are sets the tone for everything else that you do. By Picard going back and saying, I don't want this heart. Well, okay, I'll change the circumstances. You won't make these choices you made as a kid. Don't worry, I take care of all that for you. But he played it safe. And so when he came out in the end, he was no longer able to take command. He's this little paper shuffling dude in the lower decks, having a nice time reporting to everybody else. And that's what the trickster character is like across the boards in many, many, many of our own stories.